I am the executive editor of High Times Magazine, and boy, we have a great seminar panel for you today. I'm sure all of you have been wondering about dabs. That's the kind of the slang word for concentrates. How are they made? Are they dangerous? Are they absolutely perfect? We're going to answer some of your questions today. And I'm going to introduce the moderator of the panel. He's somebody who's been covering the dab scene since the very beginning, since the dawn of the dab, if you will. Senior editor Bobby Black. Everybody give him a warm hand.
Thank you, Dan. Hey guys, how you doing? How's everybody doing?
Hey.
You'll have to excuse me, I've been busting my butt out in the sun all day, so if I'm a little out of breath. So I'm Bobby Black. I'm senior editor, as Dan Sky told you, and back in our February 2012 issue of this year, I did a feature called The Concentrate Revolution, which was about the dab phenomenon, which has been sweeping across the cannabis community for the past few years. It's still pretty localized to the connoisseur market. I think most stoners out in the country aren't too aware of it yet, but it's catching on fast. And so there's been some, controversy surrounding this issue because the concentrates, BHOs, butane hash oil, is made with butane extraction. There are some people who are a little uncomfortable with it. They have some negative feelings about it because they feel it's like a little, not a natural process, or that it might be unhealthy. And on the other hand, there are people who, love to dab and who say, hey, it's not any more dangerous than any other form of ingesting and all that other stuff. So there's also possible PR issues that have been raised about it as far as how the public in general perceives how people smoke dabs and how they're made. So that's what we're trying to convene this panel for, is to try to address these issues. We want to dispel any unnecessary fears, we want to, or any myths, and we also want to honestly and openly discuss any possible dangers that may exist, whether it be in making it, which we know can be very dangerous, or also with ingesting it. So to that end, to have that open, frank conversation, we've assembled a really great panel here. Let me run down the line. First, right here to my left, someone who's been a little bit of a critic, I believe, of BHO. He makes only natural extracts, no butane. He's the owner of Essential Extracts of Denver, works with Pink House, and is the provider of award-winning high-grade solventless concentrates for over 24 dispensaries. Please welcome Selecta Nicotine. Next to him, we have Dr. Alan Shackelford, a highly educated, experienced, and articulate advocate for medical marijuana. Is trained at Harvard Medical School, is a top physician at the Intermedical Consulting in Amerimed, Colorado, and was recently featured in the Nat Geo Channel's American Weed program.
All right.
To his left, we have one of the world's top experts on the biology of the cannabis plant and its effects on the human endocannabinoid system, which he kind of helped discover in a way. He's the Associate Professor of Biology here at the University of Colorado and President and CEO of Cannabis Science, Inc. Please welcome Dr. Bob Melamine.
Yeah.
This well-camouflaged gentleman over here is William Breathes. He's the nation's first salaried medical marijuana critic and cannabis scene writer for Denver's Westward publication. He's the winner of NORML's 2011 Hunter S. Thompson Media Award for Outstanding Achievement in advancing the cause of ending marijuana prohibition, and you may have seen him on The Daily Show. So give it up for William Breathes.
Yeah.
And last but certainly not least, down on the end there, we have Big D Daniel LaSalle. I'm sorry, how do you say last name, man? Daniel DeSalle? Desai. My bad. He has a ton of experience making and providing BHO and other concentrates for patients. One of the proprietors of Top Shelf Extracts, Colorado's #1 wholesaler of medical marijuana cannabis concentrates, and winner of 3 High Times Cannabis Cup Awards and numerous other caregiver cups. So give it up for Big D. So before we get started with any questions and topics, I'd like to just open it up for each of you to make a statement, up to maybe 2 to 3 minutes, brief, just telling people a little about your background and what your feelings are about what we're talking about. So we can, I guess we can begin.
All right, my name is Nick Tanum. I go by Selected Nicotine. And I've been making hash for about 10 years now. It's been a passion in my life. I'm also a DJ, thus the Selected Nicotine. And both these things have been extreme passions in my life, and I'm so stoked to be here doing exactly what I love doing every day. And that is providing medicine to the patients and providing music to the people. So I'm extremely stoked to be here. I make solventless hash for a living, and one of the first things I wanted to say is I'm definitely not against BHO in any way. Right now, it's such a new phenomenon that we really don't know if there are dangers to it, if there aren't dangers to it as well. So for me, it's just something, I prefer the solventless method. Number one, because I don't have to worry about any solvents being left over in my product. And number two, because this is what we prefer. We can retain terpenoids a lot better than most solvents, although there are a lot of amazing solvent extractions out there right now. And like I said, I really don't have anything against solvent extractions or BHO. This whole dab phenomenon is so new to all of us that I think we have a lot more research to do before we can even make a final decision.
I'm Alan Shackelford. I have been researching medical literature, at least, on cannabis for a number of years, and in my medical practice, I've seen a number of patients who use concentrates of a variety of different extraction methods with great success for a number of different medical conditions. I also sit on the Colorado Department of Revenue Medical Marijuana Advisory Work Group, one of 2 physicians, and in that capacity we were tasked and have been and will be tasked with the safety of medical marijuana, both in the growth of the plant itself and in extraction methods. The rulemaking process that we engaged in this past year, and will be starting up again next week actually, has been focused from our perspective on providing or making sure that the products that are provided to the patients in Colorado don't cause any downside, have any negative effects. So to that end, we've looked at fertilizers, pesticides, herbicides, extraction methods, any sort of chemical that might impact the safety of the cannabis in any form in which it's used. Concentrates can be provided in a variety of different ways, as you all know. Butane extraction is certainly one of them, and people have used other methods which are probably less safe. CO2 extraction is, of course, another which doesn't use any particular volatile solvent. The problem here is that we really don't know much about the product that comes out with any extraction method, be it CO2 or a volatile solvent. The analyses, the first, are difficult because the reference standards are difficult to find, and it's hard to really figure out exactly how they differ. The thing that's really important here is, because we don't necessarily know what the specific impact on the cannabis is, we go back to looking at what the effects of the solvents themselves are, and we'll talk more about that in detail as this panel progresses.
So I've been a cannabis user since I was 16 years old, and you can clearly see the dangers of doing that. But the one thing that was always a constant, and it's been now, I'm 64, so I've been using it for a while, one of the things that bothered me for many decades really was I have very sensitive lungs, and smoking would really bother me. And it was a number of years ago that I basically, for the most part, gave up smoking at all and just turned to eating, whether it be brownies or cookies or raw bud or whatever. I was eating everything. And about a year or 2 ago, I became what I call a tar baby. Yeah. So what I do is I eat CO2 extracts, ethanol extracts, butane extracts, And I think that they're all good for you. As long as you're not using anything that's bad. So if you have dirty ethanol and you do an ethanol extract, you're going to get a dirty concentrate. If you use dirty butane, which is available cheaper than high quality butane, then any residues that might be in there that are themselves not volatile will be left over. So it's with anything else, you know, what garbage in, garbage out, and put something good in, and what comes out is good. And just to argue a little bit with my buddy here, with my doctor, CO2 is an organic solvent that is volatile. That's why you use it. It's a 1-carbon organic solvent. Ethanol is a 2-carbon organic solvent. Propanol is a 3-carbon. Butane is a 4-carbon. Hexane is a 6-carbon, etc. So they're all organic solvents, and if they're dirty to begin with and you don't get rid of everything that was in them, then you have contaminants that you don't want to necessarily consume. So I think that's the bottom line. If you're doing any kind of extract and you've got pesticides or fungal contaminants, the fungi produce really nasty compounds, you know. So the key is start with good, clean stuff and use good, clean procedures to produce whatever you're producing and then benefit from it. Yeah.
I'm Will. I have really no idea why I'm here. I'm not a doctor, and I don't make but I have been around buying it and seeing and part of the scene for a while, and I think I've seen the progression of it, and that's why I was asked to be here. I really don't have a preference either way. I like my solventless. I like my solventless hash. Enjoy my butane extracts. I really like the ISO extracts that are starting to become big around. And I'm really here to sort of learn and probably sit back and not say much more. Thanks, guys.
My name is Daniel Desai. I moved to Colorado about a year and a half ago now to make concentrates for one dispensary. In Los Angeles, I managed a few different dispensaries, and I had the chance to meet some really, really good hash artists out there. And I had the privilege of them teaching me quite a bit. So when I moved out here, I started doing it full time. I'm a big proponent of BHO because I've seen that, you know, as medicine, it both helps with harm reduction. It practically cures withdrawal symptoms in people that are, you know, alcoholics or addicted to speed or pharmaceuticals, and also pain management. I mean, I've seen it just make people's pain evaporate, and you know, they get up, they walk around, they feel way better. And also, I'm into the culture of it. I'm into collecting glass. I'm into making the best possible tasting concentrates I can as well, and appealing to the connoisseurs. Okay. I'm into making the best possible tasting concentrates as well, so that it appeals to the connoisseurs. And yeah, I'm 100% proponent of it. Thank you.
Okay, before we go any further, just by a quick show of hands, does anyone not know what BHO is or how it's made? Is there anyone that needs like a little quick primer on about it? Or is everybody pretty much familiar with it? Okay, so we don't need to go through that. So, why would a patient choose BHO over other delivery systems of cannabis that have been tried and true and may be, in some people's minds, less scary or less harmful or something?
Because it works every single time, and it's also possible to regulate your dosage a little easier. You know, you take a fraction of a percent of a gram, and you're fully medicated and you're exactly where you want to be. A lot of times with flowers, there's variations. So I think concentrates just help people lock it in better and treat themselves easier.
Now, we were saying that any possible dangers that you guys perceive as coming from smoking BHO would be due to the use of inferior butane or what we would call a bad purge, an incomplete purge, right?
Well, or if you had solvents. If you had, for example, pesticides on your plant material, that's going to come off into that solvent. So when you evaporate the solvent, you'll actually be concentrating those things, and that's the real danger. You know, pesticides are typically extremely nasty in how they can affect your nervous system and potentially your immune system. So you definitely don't want to ever be consuming that, which is another reason why not only with the cannabis products you consume, but with your food in general, you should be conscious about what you're eating, because if you're not eating organically produced food, which is not always easy to do, or if you're eating hormone-treated meat, you're basically voting for that kind of process because you're buying it. If nobody buys it, nobody will make it. So it's the same thing with your cannabis as well. Know what you're doing. Have some basic understanding of reality. Learn some science and learn about your health and what you should be doing to improve your health.
Yeah, and there's so many other variables too, other than even the pesticides used or the quality of the butane used. So many other variables, even to go as far as if people are processing fresh material, but they don't know how to completely process fresh material compared to dry material, they're going to have dangers of leaving butane in. They're going to have other dangers. Dangers of having too much plant material come in. Being way too harsh on the throat. So there's just so many variables, I think.
Well, there are a couple of things that enter into this picture. One of them is whether or not residual hydrocarbons like butane are dangerous. And there isn't any evidence and I looked through the National Library of Medicine database on this, there isn't any evidence that small amounts of residual butane are problematic. Now, in high concentrates, butane or any of these volatile substances are potentially fatal. And if people do using concentrating butane in a balloon, for example, and what's the term? Inhaling it, there's another term for that, but
Puffing?
No, helium, yeah, a whole different matter, but that's oxygen deprivation. Oh, it's oxygen deprivation though, and in fact, that is the point. Oxygen deprivation, when you're inhaling concentrated hydrocarbons like butane, you displace the oxygen just like helium. And of course, the butane goes into solution in the fat cells, so it hangs around for a while. But there isn't any evidence that butane or heptane or hexane or any of these other substances are dangerous in trace amounts. So, at least according to the National Library of Medicine database. If it's there in higher concentrates, then we have a whole different discussion. The other side of this that's important is the question of smoking. Now, there is evidence that, very good evidence, that smoking marijuana does not harm the lungs. And I'm quite sure that smoking concentrates, hash oil, does not harm the lungs either. It's an irritant, but that's about as far as it goes. The thing that's really important is that as temperatures are elevated above about 400 degrees Fahrenheit, you begin to destroy many of the physiologically active cannabinoids that you find in both botanical plant material marijuana and concentrates, regardless of how they're concentrated. So there are other things to discuss with regard to smoking or heating it up beyond about 400 degrees, but they don't really, it's more a question of efficacy of its effect and its use as opposed to dangers.
So you're saying in trace amounts it's not, but what if someone is a somewhat abusive dabber? What if they're dabbing all day, every day? Does it then become an issue?
I think it depends on how much they're using, as you said, but we don't have much data on it. And so, as always, when we don't have a whole lot of data on it, it's best to err on the side of caution. Meaning, if we don't really know, and it's hard to say exactly how much somebody's using if they're consuming a given amount, and we could test this, it just hasn't been done yet. A given amount on an ongoing basis, is there any particular danger? If we don't really know, it's best to avoid something. But the way that it's produced, and the way that, as Dr. Melamed said, the way that it's produced and the quality of the materials used, in particular the quality of the raw material that you're extracting from, has a huge impact on the final product and its safety.
And also, we got to take into account that this, the technique for making BHO has been around since about the year 2000 in Canada. And the way everybody learned about it in the U.S. was over the internet. So people have been dabbing and dabbing heavy for decades. And there haven't been any real problems reported yet.
Well, I actually know someone who had a problem that was dab related. She's actually here in the audience. If she was, I'd like you to just say real quick. She had an issue where she was dabbing and she had to be taken to the emergency room, and almost could have had a fatal accident. So I would just like her to really briefly, in a few sentences, tell us what happened to you. This is Jesse, everybody.
Like the doctors up there are saying, I went to the hospital because I had something they called epiglottitis. It is when the little thing in the back of your throat... Push up?
No, just speak up.
Oh, there we go. My epiglottis in the back of my throat swelled up, and it was from an irritant kind of passing over the back of my throat. It was an undefined irritant. It's unknown if it was from the product or from butane itself, like either the weed that was used to make it, but I was at a stage where basically I saw a glowing nail, and I took it, and I took the dab. It wasn't anything I had made, and it wasn't anything that I really knew where it came from, and so that was a big problem. And I think that it's really important for people to just know where it came from. We're used to that with weed. We don't just take a bowl and smoke it. We say, you know, is this, what is it? Was it organic? And we need to do that with whatever type of concentrate we're using. And I think that no matter, I think it's evolving so that maybe we need to look more into the science of it and everything. But I really think that dabbing shouldn't be avoided, really, because I think it should be researched and it shouldn't be criticized. It should be looked at better, and I think that's important.
Thanks, Jesse. So what she said was, you know, basically this flap of skin that separates your esophagus from your trachea in the back of your, it was inflamed, and this can happen from irritants, it can happen from infections, it can happen from heat sometimes. And I'll let the doctors address this because I'm not a doctor, but if it happened to her, that means it could happen to someone else. And if it was the butane that caused it, then this is a possible danger, because if she hadn't been taken to the hospital quickly enough, she could have died. And if this is something that isn't particular just to dabbing and it was just a fluke thing, then that's great. But if this is something that can happen to a lot of people on a regular basis, then it's something that we need to raise awareness about, because the first time some poor person does a dab and drops dead, it's going to be very bad for the whole scene and for the legalization scene in general. So, doctors, would you guys like to address this?
Yeah, I'd like to, because I think it's highly unlikely that that had anything to do with the butane.
Yeah.
Cannabis itself is an anti-inflammatory, so there had to be something else going in there that was pretty nasty with respect to how her body responded to it. And, you know, it could be, there are people who are developing allergies who work in the grow rooms. So she might have had a particular allergy to something that was concentrated. It could have been contaminants in the product itself. I'd say the least likely of all was that it had anything to do with the butane. And we are making concentrates from all of these other things. Ethanol is itself a poison. The amount that you'd ever have left over is never significant enough to have a real effect on you. And I think the situation with butane is very comparable to that. You're not going to get enough butane by whatever is left over, from what I know, to ever be a problem. And it does evaporate pretty easily. Just heat it up, even with boiling water. You're not going to necessarily alter other things, but you would tend to evaporate most of that butane.
Yeah, the temperature of the evaporative temperature of butane is extremely low. And so if you're heating it up and it's vaporizing or being burned, that butane is pretty much gone. Any residual would not be a problem. So I completely agree with Dr. Malamud that there may well have been other concentrates, as we said earlier, possibly pesticides or herbicides or something else that were concentrated by the extraction method. And maybe it was a function of just temperature. You can actually get epiglottitis from coffee if you drink it or swallow it incorrectly. So, there are a lot of different things it could have been. I very much doubt that it was the butane itself, or probably the concentrate itself at all, but something else, some other factor. So I don't think that necessarily is a negative about using butane extracted concentrates.
I've had extracts that people have given me that I literally threw in the garbage. So it really does depend on what you're getting and how it was made, whether it was made from, bud or crap leaves that had no trichomes. I mean, you got a whole spectrum there of what people are going to do to try to make money, unscrupulous people who we don't want to support in any fashion. If I can make one other comment, I periodically do smoke the tar, as I call it, and what I found to be very effective is if you have just like a small pipe and you get a nice clean screen and it's not a pipe that you've used, so it's a glass pipe, it's all nice and clean. And if you just leave the carburetor open, if it's got especially a big carburetor, you leave that carburetor open and you put the lighter on it, take one big hit, and it'll all melt and evaporate without really burning because you have enough air coming through it. And I find that to work very effectively and to be actually quite mild on the throat because you're just bringing in so much air, and it's very effective.
Great. Well, that's very comforting to know that you guys, I feel a little more at ease that it wasn't necessarily dabbing that did that to her. It was just some factor that didn't pertain to the BHO. That's comforting. So I guess the problem with safety with BHO then is really just about the purity. It's about the purity of the butane and the quality of the purge and the quality of the material you start with. So let me ask the guys who make this stuff, as a consumer looking for this, as a patient looking for this, how can you be sure, what are you looking for to know that the stuff you're getting is pure enough to smoke?
The best thing to do is to actually go through the process of smoking it, heating up a tie nail or a quartz nail, which is how most of us, most patients do consume BHO. If it makes a sound, then you know for sure, it makes a crackling sound, you know for sure it's dirty because there's butane left in it, and the heat is converting the butane into CO2, to water and hydrogen. So, water and CO2, excuse me. So, it makes a sizzling sound like it would if you had water in a skillet with some oil.
Wouldn't another variable with the sizzle, could that possibly be trapped moisture as well?
Yeah. It's a possibility, but if you're vacuum purging it, then there's no chance of this trapping moisture.
I believe there is even in a vacuum, especially here in the altitude, because a lot of people are playing around with this whole phenomenon of vacuum purging, but they don't know all the details to what they're getting into. People are getting vacuums and pumps and chambers that aren't completely sealing, or they're not getting strong enough of a vacuum here in the altitude. And I've even seen, some material that we've been playing around with still crackle after just having water stuck in it from the vacuum chamber and everything.
Me personally, I wouldn't take the chance if it's sizzling, then there is a problem with the technique of the person that was making it.
Yeah, whether water or butane, there's something left that you don't want in it.
Yeah, and if they couldn't keep the water out of it, I don't know if I'd trust their extraction skills.
I think the biggest concern, though, once again, is the quality of the marijuana and who's been growing it and whether they've been using pesticides or not. And I personally would not use cannabis products that I didn't know who produced it or have it properly analyzed. And you can analyze not only for THC and CBDs and CBNs and blah, 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 you can also analyze for mold and pesticides. And we have to really be demanding quality product, not supporting garbage.
Since Will has tested and sampled a pretty broad range of different products, perhaps, and I don't mean to step into the moderator's seat here, but I would like to know if you have, what you've encountered in sampling some of the different concentrates.
Thanks, Doc. No, I've seen a wide range. There's stuff that, like Dan said, I'm not even hitting. I'm just heating up the nail and dabbing it on there to see the reaction, because from the look of it, it's very viscous. I like to say it looks like used 40-weight motor oil in some of these places. So that would be you change your own oil. So yeah, it's really gross. Thankfully, we've seen a lot of progression. I'm starting to see a lot better wax around the shops and around the community. And I think, Dan touched on this a little bit earlier. The one good thing about this is people aren't necessarily keeping their secrets under their hat, and people are talking about this, and it is a progression and a movement in this concentrate that people are sharing, trying to find the best way to get it right. And so if you want to do it right, the information's out there, which makes it actually even worse when you see people doing it really wrong.
Right.
The one thing I want to mention, I kind of keep hearing this theme, is that Dr. Bob over here is saying that he only trusts getting medicine from people that he knows. Other people are saying that it has to be done properly. And this is the biggest issue that I'm seeing, is that it is still so new, and there's 90% of the people that are playing around with these solvents and doing these extractions that don't know how to do it properly, especially when it comes down to different strains. And the different strains are going to have different variables. We continue to run into this, and I've been doing this for 10 years, and I still learn every day. certain strains are going to retain those solvents a lot, a lot better than other strains. Certain strains are going to be a lot easier to pull off all the solvent immediately, whereas other strains are going to take a lot longer. And there's so many people out there that are doing the same process for the strains that take little time to pull the solvent off, as they're doing for the strains that take a lot of time. And so this is, to me, one of the big issues, one of the big themes that I keep saying is that, this is a new phenomenon. And like I said, I don't have anything against it. I just want to see more research done. I want to see the longevity of it.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and that the fact that there hasn't been medical studies done, and how can we go about getting medical studies done when, so far up until recently, the government has not really made marijuana research very, easily accessible. Is it possible in Colorado or in California or some medical state to start conducting these studies and start conducting these clinical studies and getting this information?
We can't do clinical studies on marijuana in the United States with any ease at all. They have to, clinical studies that are truly clinical studies where you're actually providing a particular substance to a group of subjects and comparing it to a placebo require, if it's marijuana, the approval of FDA, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and the DEA. And to get the three of them to agree on a marijuana study, and you have to use the marijuana provided by the University of Mississippi in Oxford. So, which has been described by, yes, horrible, very bad quality.
He's got a spectrum of stuff there. He just gives out the chunk. Well, to the medical patients.
I'd like to know what he does with the good stuff.
Obama gets it.
Cool. Well, Dr. Bob knows Dr. El Soli, and I think that's pretty cool. And one of these days we'll go down and see him, will we not? Okay. I think the thing that's really important, though, on this is that House Bill 1043 that was passed last year in the legislature does provide for a research and development activity in Colorado. We have not yet met in the Department of Revenue to come up with the rules which will govern how that particular clause functions in the real world. And there are some big unknowns, the biggest of those being whether or not DEA and NIDA and FDA will let us actually do anything that is bordering clinical trial. The attitude was well reflected by a statement by Shirley Simpson, a spokeswoman for NIDA in the New York Times in January of 2010, when she said, as the National Institute on Drug Abuse, we generally do not fund studies that might show medical benefit to marijuana. That's kind of a paraphrase. But the problem, and you can kind of understand that because it's the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and their focus is on negatives, if any. But the problem is that NIDA funds 85% of the world's research into substances like marijuana. So it's extraordinarily difficult to do unbiased, proper clinical trials in the United States. Whether they're going to be done elsewhere, it's a question of money.
I'd like to just add a little more on to that, though. Cannabis Science is working with a group in Boulder that specializes in going through the FDA, designing the clinical trials, etc. And they're very confident that we're going to be able to do that either on a national level or within Colorado. And we're proceeding with that to go sometime within the next few months to the National Institute of Health to what they call a pre-IND meeting, where basically the NIH tells you, the FDA tells you what you have to do in order to accomplish your endpoint. So they're actually quite confident. If you go to our website, cannabisscience.com, you'll see the results of topical cannabis application to some really severe squamous cell carcinomas that are aside from totally disgusting, are mind-blowing in how the effectiveness there is. One of the two patients has now been biopsied as clear, and the other one has gotten rid of about 80% of a tumor that extended about 3 inches off the top of his head. And after 135 radiation treatments and chemotherapy, they were told there's nothing they could do other than to cut off his scalp and a good piece of his skull. And now the cannabis is working remarkably on it. So we think that a lot of the human data that we're able to generate is profound enough for things where there really are no alternatives that the government hopefully will actually listen.
Well, it's gratifying to hear that there's some good progress being made. So thank you for that.
Just briefly, those are observational studies. it's a kind of one-off. You look at what someone is doing and see what the effect was, and those are okay. We can do those. We can't do the organized clinical trial yet, and it would be lovely if that works. I am on Cannabis Sciences Medical Advisory Board and privy to a lot of this. It's really quite remarkable. But again, those are one-off, and they suggest places we can go with the research. We just need to either be completely in the closet with it, which is not a great way to do it, or go through the proper channels to get it done correctly, and that's what Cannabis Science is now doing.
So I want to go back to a point that you made, Nick T, which is that you were talking about how you because this is so new, you just don't know necessarily what you're getting, and some people who are making it don't really know what they're doing. And I think one of the biggest dangers, aside from what the perceived dangers were of ingesting the butane or the BHO, is the making of it. The making of it can be very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. And I think part of the biggest problem, not only with physical danger, but with the perceived PR problem, is sort of a bathtub gin situation, where you have people who have no experience whatsoever in making concentrates, trying to make it at home, and blowing themselves up, blowing up their apartments and things, because they don't take the safety precautions and take the risks seriously. So, and that's why the term has ended up being called blasting. When you're blasting flowers, it's because, you know, it's an unfortunate nickname in a way, because some people have blasted the refrigerator doors off their refrigerators while trying to make it. So, knowing that this is probably the biggest danger involved in it, we at High Times discourage all of our readers from making BHO themselves. Our opinion is that you should go to, if you're in a medical state, you should go to a dispensary that you trust, who has someone like these gentlemen who know what they're doing, who are supplying pure product, who are supplying well-made product. But, of course, that doesn't mean that most of the people in the country are going to follow that advice, or people who don't live in medical states that want it are going to try to do it. And, like I said, High Times discourages that activity, but at the same time, we know people are going to do it, and we're concerned. So, I mean, what advice can we give would-be, you know, blasters, you know, to do it right if they're going to do it, and to be safe? What, guys, if you have anything to offer?
If they're going to do it, they have to do it outside. Every one of these people that blew themselves up did it inside, when either it wasn't fully purged or they actually just blasted inside. There's two ways to go about using butane to extract, like an open system, where you take a tube, you fill it with trim, you stick a can of butane on one side and it falls through a culprit. Oh, sorry. Where you just fill up a tube, glass or stainless steel with trim, put a can of butane on one side, and then filter it through a couple of coffee filters into a pan where you purge it. That's the open system, and people were doing that inside and blowing themselves up. The other way, you can get a machine that actually recycles it, and that's a lot safer, but you still have to be in a well-ventilated area.
The other thing that's important is, as Dan mentioned, is to use glass or stainless steel. Do not use PVC piping. This butane extracts all kinds of stuff, and you don't want polyvinyl chloride in your extracted concentrate. In addition, in the rulemaking in the Department of Revenue, which governs, of course, dispensaries, not caregivers or private individuals, we debated long and hard about how to regulate the extraction method using butane or other volatile solvents like that with explosive danger. And we didn't actually impose a particular rule, but we probably will this year, simply because those dangers do exist, and you'll have to either use a closed system, which accumulates the butane, or an exhaust hood and a number of different things. And one of the rules that was imposed this past year was the use of food-grade plastic to do water or bubble hash extractions, because even that can, if you're just using something, the orange bucket you bought at Home Depot, you're likely to extract unwanted chemicals from the plastic. So there are rules that are in place about this, and you have to use your head. I mean, you can't just, expect that your homeowner's insurance is going to cover you if you blow up the neighbor's house.
Just a quick question. What can possibly leach from, say, your Home Depot bucket just using ice and water?
Well,
out of curiosity.
I don't remember precisely what all the chemical substances were. There are hardeners in the plastic the rules governing industrial plastics do not exclude the use of dangerous products that food-grade products are not allowed to use. So whatever they may be. I mean, just assume that if it's an industrial product, there's going to be stuff in it that it doesn't matter if it gets into the concrete. It matters if it gets into your hash.
Okay, so you're saying that a food grade plastic wouldn't leach?
That's less so, yeah. I think Dr. Bob's right.
Less so.
Less so. That plastic is always going to be a potential problem.
Yeah, no, it's
And
always
so
been scary.
you want to use something that's inert, more inert than plastic, like glass or lab grade steel, stainless steel.
I mean, if you ever just left your water in the car, in a hot car, and then drank it, it's quite disgusting.
Definitely the heat. I just haven't heard of it with
Yeah.
cold temperatures.
Well, it's going to just change the rate at which it'll come out.
Okay.
You know, like for example, I only carry a glass jar around for water because I don't like the idea of what comes out of plastic, and I don't like the idea of making all that plastic and then disposing of it all. So again, we have to think about the world we live in and what we should be doing to make it better, not worse.
Totally agree.
And as far as, for again, going back to the idea of the home BHO maker, just to clarify, what level of butane needs to be used? Obviously, there are different levels. They don't want to use the plain butane that you buy to fill your Bic lighter. You want to get something that's, what, like quadruple refined or better? Is that what the standard would be?
I personally use Vector 5X, and I'm in the process of switching over to pure N butane. I think that's ultimately the goal, because there's 1 part in a million of sulfur, and that's the worst thing in it.
But that could, potentially pose another danger. Is you just asked him how many times refined. There's all these companies coming out of Korea now and other places that are saying it's 5 times refined, it's 3 times refined, and who really knows how many times they refined it and what type of refinery process that they're using. So their 5 times refined may not be as clean as, say, Calibri's 3 times refined.
You're completely right. That's why...
So there's no across-the-board standard for purity?
I go to the knowledge base that's online right now. I mean, it's really extensive, and they tested every single one. And the standard test is they'll spray a can in an empty pan and see what's left behind after. And so far, Vector, Calibri are the 2 choice brands to use for making BHO.
You could also get laboratory grade product at a lab or science supply house. The cost differential, yeah, it's huge. The cost differential could make the difference, and though again, if it's a dispensary level type product, you want to be able to assure the patients who are using that product that it's been done under the cleanest possible conditions with the highest possible quality materials.
Now let's say they have good starting material, they have good flowers, they get the right kind of butane, a good quality butane, and they're doing it in a safe way. Now they're at this stage where they need to purge. What are the different ways of purging? Which is the safest? Which is the most effective? And how do you purge well so that it's done right and clean at the end?
If I was doing a home run or something, I guess I would make sure that I blasted into a pan that was already floating in warm water, or like hot water to where you put your finger in it and you'd have to pull it out after a second. So then I'd blast into that. You basically see it all bubble away and evaporate, and what's left over are big thick bubbles which you then have to pop. And it'll usually take about 2 or 3 water changes until you can actually take it inside, because there's not enough butane left in it to do anything. And once you're in there, like some people would actually do it on their stove. I never would, but I use a different heat source just to keep it about 110, 120. And if I want to make butter, I'll whip it. If I want to make shatter oil, I'll put that in a vacuum purger.
And I don't remember what I was just going to say. What are some of the dangers that people have to look for in regard to possibly igniting the BHO while they're doing this process? Because I know some people would think it's just an open flame, but there are other things that can cause it, right?
Yeah, static electricity could possibly cause it. But I think Denver might be actually one of the more dangerous places to make it, because our humidity is so low, especially during the summer. but I haven't had a single accident. We basically just, try to be as well ventilated as possible, be outside.
But, these dangers are real, and we do need to talk about these dangers because people are blowing themselves up in their homes every single day, and it is a serious issue. So if we are going to continue doing this, which I'm sure we are, we're going to continue charging forward, we need to definitely take into account all the safety precautions needed for this process.
And that kind of brings us to the last topic, the last big topic, which is the PR, the perception, the public